All right, so let's jump straight into this. I'm going to listen to as much as I can today, comment when appropriate. And this is episode 1, so let's see what we've got.
Oh dear. All right, so here's the categorization of arguments we've got. So just break this down a bit. We've got cosmological arguments, teleological arguments, ontological arguments, two types of theological arguments against theism in general, and then theological arguments against Christianity specifically, or like Yahweh and Jesus and so forth. We've got epistemological arguments, axiological arguments, or like moral type arguments, experiential arguments, anthropological arguments, biblical arguments focusing on specific on the Bible, historical arguments focusing on like the history of Christianity, and then a grab bag of leftover arguments. So lots of different categories here. And yeah, I do think that there are some good arguments in here mixed up with a lot of repetition and a few weaker ones. So let's make a start. We're going to start with the cosmological arguments. Okay, so it's actually quite large when I just wonder, is there a way I can not full screen this or something? I don't think there is.
I mean,
because it's kind of hard to read.
oh, you're
Maybe
on
just...
a Microsoft PowerPoint, right? So you're gonna have different options.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you could display,
maybe I can just flip back to the stream. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'll just get used to it. All right. So causal closure of the physical. So this I actually think is a good argument. And this is a point I've actually made before. If the physical world is causally closed, the existence of God generally is taken to imply causal effects from outside the physical world onto it. Then that's impossible if you believe in the causal closure of the physical. There just isn't anything that exercises causal powers outside the physical world. Of course, the theist is just going to deny one, right? But so the thing is, in developing these arguments, you sort of realize the many games that apologists play. Like someone like William Lane Craig, for example, would just say, sure, I can't prove that the first premise is true, but there's a lot of reason to think that it's more likely than not.
Okay, there's no guesswork required to know that premise 1 is false if you believe that you have free will, right? Because causal closure means that all causes are physical. That's nonsense. We know that the one thing we know with certainty is that causal closure is false. We know this because we have free will. We're humans. We have human nature. We're made in the image and likeness of God, and we have free will and reason, and we reason freely. And so we know that every thought we have is supernatural. It's not natural. And the atheist might want to claim that everything is natural and that causal closure is the case, but in doing so, they're accepting hard determinism, and then they lose every argument because they render themselves incapable of making a meaningful argument. And everything just becomes, it is what it is.
And then you just appeal to all of our scientific evidence and no good evidence in favor of anything against that. And so Craig would say something like, 2 is just the standard definition of what theists say. So 1 is the only controversial premise here. And there's lots of evidence to think that 1 is more likely true than not. Therefore, it follows logically and inescapably that God does not exist.
Yeah, I've just been reading like a popular level kind of like intro to physics book that talks about a bunch of topics, stuff like causal closure. There was a bit of talk about like reductionism, supersymmetry, stuff like that. And what's really interesting is the difference between the way that apologists represent the discourse about what our best scientists tell us about how the world is, and the different way that physicists actually like talk about it. Like there's a bunch of things that physicists will almost like take for granted and just be like, yeah, this is just what you'll get taught in like an undergraduate physics course. That like apologists will be like, yeah, only the hardcore dogmatic materialists are going to commit to this. No, I know like say the physical world being causally closed, there's some philosophers who are like not particularly dogmatic, but are going to like say maybe, you know, this is maybe we don't actually know that this applies. Maybe like consciousness is like something natural, but it somehow has like downward causation and violates this principle, or something like that. I mean, I don't know enough to make any kind of strong claim about that myself, but
I do. I studied physics at university. We dismiss as negligible all kinds of things: friction, air currents, the rotation of the Earth, rotation of the galaxy, the rotation of the universe, all sorts of things, okay, that the mainstream physicists take for granted, but we dismiss them when doing calculations in order to simplify, because otherwise it's just too cumbersome. We can't do any calculation if we have to take into consideration all of the messy reality. Okay, so it's the same thing with the supernatural mind with which the physicist is thinking as he's doing physics. We dismiss the fact that our thoughts, our minds, our souls, our free will, our reason is supernatural. We dismiss that as a negligible thing, because just as we can dismiss the quantum effects when we're dealing with the macro world, we can dismiss the supernatural causes behind each and every thought of each and every human, including the scientists in the laboratory. We can dismiss those because we know that at the macro level, how this is all playing out is in a well-ordered way, in a predictable way. Okay, so that's what you're missing in your analysis of this. And the causal closure is just a simplification. We're just saying the reason we're only dealing with physical effects is because that's what physics is limited to. Physics, by definition, as a natural science, is ill-equipped to deal with God, the supernatural, and all these other things. It's only dealing with these events in the natural world, right, which are well-ordered, aka God exists, and predictable, and the wonderful weirdness that you can explore when you start zooming in a little too much. That's when you start to maybe get a little bit closer to the interplay between the supernatural mind of the human with the decisions and the choices they're making and the natural world. But it's all well ordered. It's all well ordered. The laws of nature are never violated. But just as in a computer game that was built and designed by a superior mind to the actual players, the hardware itself, the software itself, the design of the software, all of the contingencies, all of the loopholes that the programmer built into it, those are all following the laws of nature. There's no violation ever. It's the same thing with our human minds when we're in the laboratory. We are part of nature, and yet we transcend nature with our supernatural souls, with our supernatural minds. But there's no violation of nature. If we were able to zoom in sufficiently with our mind's eye, I mean, you can forget about using lab equipment to zoom in to find that interplay between the supernatural and the natural, although some have speculated that the effects of the observer are sort of hinting at that proximity to the interplay between the supernatural and the natural. I don't commit to that. It might be possible. I don't know. I think we've got a long way to go. I think the abyss between what our instruments can pick up and the subtle interplay between the supernatural and the natural, that abyss is insurmountable to natural science. But God only knows. I'll find out on Judgment Day.
But it just seems plausible to me, and that's kind of like all you need, right, to get the argument off the ground, that like the premise is more plausible than its negation. And then,
well, this premise one, the physical world is causally closed, it's a nice, neat, tidy assumption for the natural scientist. He cannot assume otherwise because he doesn't have access to the supernatural as a natural scientist. So this whole exercise is totally misguided when you start blending the physical sciences, the natural sciences, and physics, as I say time and time again. Physics just means nature. So we're examining nature. We're examining the natural realm. The natural sciences, preeminently physics, is limited to studying natural events. It doesn't say anything about the ultimate cause of any particular event. It just observes the events and then tries to make models and tries to predict and these sorts of things. So you should go back to school. If you haven't studied physics, you should start. And if you have studied physics, you should go back and brush up, boys.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think that if you're going to argue along those grounds, you shouldn't use deductive style arguments because it doesn't, it's like combining probabilistic and deductive reasoning, which doesn't make sense. But I guess it's useful to realize that that is what apologists do, especially, I mean, I know most about Craig, right? But he definitely does that, and others do.
I don't use probabilities. We can get to a certain knowledge of God by the natural light of reason without recourse to probabilities, statistics, guesswork, Bayesian logic, abduction, induction. We don't need any of that. Okay, we have pure reason without any faith-based beliefs, without any holy books, without any religion. So you boys are out to lunch. You don't know even the distinction between the natural sciences and philosophy, much less philosophy, theology, and ultimately God himself as the source of science. Science with the big S.
In his following on from him as well. So it's interesting how easy it is to actually come up with arguments like that, where you can say like it's valid. Premise 2 is generally agreed to be true. 1 is the only controversial premise.
To say that if God existed, he would exert causal effects on the physical world is not up for grabs if you're a Christian. If you're a Christian, you know that God created the world and he is sustaining the world. And you know that God does miracles. You know that God is that all-knowing programmer who made the game and we're the players in the game. And he doesn't violate any of the laws because the laws are his laws. He made the laws. As St. Thomas Aquinas famously said, God set out to create nature and he was not frustrated in his design. He created nature and guess what? It is natural. Hello? There's no contradiction. The supernatural God set out to create nature, a natural world, a natural realm. And guess what? He was not frustrated in his design. He created a realm that is natural. He's the master of the natural.
And you can just say, well, it's more likely true than not. So boom.
It's like a sneaky shift because you're presenting it as if it's like a deductive argument. So it's got that kind of certainty.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys are full of baloney. The existence of God can be known with certainty using pure reason alone. There's no guesswork and there's no recourse to probabilities or anything of that kind, or induction or abduction or Bayesian proofs or anything like that. So right off the get-go, cosmological argument number 001. You guys are full of it. You have no idea what you're talking about. It's embarrassing. Let's keep going.
Yeah, so although I do think this is a good argument, I wouldn't phrase it like this precisely because of that, for that reason. And obviously 1 is not going to be accepted by the theist, right? But I do think that that is a reason not to believe in supernatural. All right, so now I'm going to introduce you to the structure of the different forms of the argument. So there's like a vanilla form, right, which is like this. But of course, no series of arguments is complete without a modal form of the same argument. So get used to these. There's going to be a few of them. So it is possibly necessary that the physical world is causally closed. Under S5, the physical world is causally closed because if it's possibly necessary and it's possible, then it follows that it is. And so if God existed, he would exert causal effects on the physical world. So that's just the same as the previous premise, the premise in the previous argument. So it follows that God does not exist.
This is such an abuse of logic. You know, the modal form of proof requires that something can only not exist or not be true if it is logically impossible. You can't just willy-nilly apply the modal argument, the modal proof, to whatever suits your fancy. You can't say, like for example, today it's Monday. I can't just say, well, it's possibly necessary that today is Tuesday. Therefore, because by S5 it is Tuesday, because it's possible that's Tuesday, and using this modal logic, if it's possible, it's necessary, therefore it's Tuesday. You can't twist logic like this. You need to justify the one criterion of a modal argument, which is that the only way that something could not be the case is if it's logically impossible. You haven't established that it's logically impossible that the physical world is not causally closed. You haven't established that. In fact, we know the opposite to be the case. We know that the physical world is not causally closed. We know that. How do we know that? Because we ourselves are thinking about it in the supernatural realm. We are not monkey bots. We are not automaton apes. Okay? We're not stinky robots. We are supernatural minds, supernatural souls, united, mysteriously, with physical bodies. At conception, we have the procreated zygote, which at the moment of its conception is infused by God with a supernatural soul. So not only is this modal argument false, its premises are false, but the whole application throughout this whole video of the modal style proof is a complete, reckless, and irresponsible abuse of the modal style of proof. Because you need to establish that the only way something cannot be the case is if it's logically impossible. And these boys don't even make the slightest effort to understand that, or to explore that, or to see if they can make it work. So to say that this is silly, this 7-hour plus video is silly, is a great understatement.
I should say here, this is a summarized form of the argument. When I sometimes say by S5, there's so some of the arguments I had to abbreviate the premises so that they would fit in, and I didn't want to reduce the size of the font too much. So really here there should be another premise that says it is possible that the physical world is causally closed, and then you would say by S5, if it's possible, then it is the case.
Only if it can only if it is. That's only the case if you can show that the only way that your first premise is not possible is because of a logical impossibility. Let me rephrase that. The only way that you can use the modal argument is if you show that the only way something cannot be the case is if it's logically impossible, and you fail to do that.
But for arguments like this, where it's modal, I just sort of abbreviate it by saying under S5. As long as you think it's possible, if it's possibly necessary and possible, then it follows that it's necessary.
Yeah, if it's possibly necessary, meaning it meets the criteria, the one criterion of the modal proof.
Under S5. So that's the structure of this argument. So sometimes I'll slot that premise in explicitly, and other times I'll just sort of enclose it in to say by S5. But that's what I mean there. So otherwise,
just to clarify, sorry, James, the theist isn't necessarily going to accept this argument, right?
Oh, well, so
necessarily.
It's just the same as the modal argument, right?
I was trying to make a necessarily joke.
Yeah, no, well, but the point is that if you, something like the physical world, for example, plausibly it is either causally closed, or like that could be a necessary truth, that whether it's causally closed. So, if the theist, or to put it another way, if God exists, then he exists necessarily, and therefore the physical world is necessarily not causally closed. If God doesn't exist, then he doesn't exist necessarily, and so plausibly the physical world is necessarily causally closed, right?
Yeah, but we know that's not the case because you're using your mind right now, and unless you want to say that everything you say is meaningless, and that all your arguments are meaningless and have zero weight, then you are admitting that your mind is supernatural.
Right. So that's the that's the basis of thinking that it's necessary. And then so the debate just then takes a step back and argues like, well, is it necessary? Like, which necessary truth actually pertains? Like, so again, the point here is it's really just the same argument, but you know, modal logic though. So let's make it another form. All right. Next one. So we've had the vanilla form and the modal form. There's also an inductive form. So inductive arguments are slightly different in form because they try to basically, well, perform induction over a large number of cases. So in doing 500 of these, I may have been a little bit sloppy in some of them, but I generally try to make it actually work as an inductive argument. So here we've got every known effect has sufficient material causes. Sufficient meaning like it's enough for those causes to bring about the effect that you don't need any additional causes. The God hypothesis, or like theism, asserts that God's actions lack a material cause because God's not material. And so because we have inductive reasons to think that there aren't any such effects, therefore we have inductive evidence to believe that there is no God.
Again, just think about your creativity. When you make something happen with your mind, like the architect who designs something and then hires people to build it. It starts in the supernatural. So premise one, every known effect has sufficient material causes. Are you sure about that? Because your mind is not material. And you've caused this whole video to manifest. You caused it with your mind. It didn't just happen. You caused it to happen with your supernatural mind. You're the architect of this whole ridiculous project, this whole video, all these 500 inane arguments. To assume that every known effect has sufficient material causes is to beg the question. It's to assume what you want to be true. This is not logic. This is an abuse of logic. This is not philosophy. This is not the love of wisdom, the love of truth. It's the opposite. You're doing a disservice to yourself. You're doing a disservice to philosophy. You're doing a disservice to the natural sciences. It's an embarrassment.
So again, it's basically the same argument, but reformulated in inductive form. So vanilla, modal, inductive. Now we've got an abductive argument. So abductive reasoning is an inference to the best explanation. So here, instead of reformulating it as an induction over cases, we're formulating it as a best explanation. So all causal phenomena that have been explained are explained with reference to natural causes. Best explanation of this is that all causes are natural causes. Or you could say the best explanation of this is that nature is causally closed or something similar to that. If that's true, then atheism is true. Therefore, we have reason to believe atheism is true.
So why are you willing to say if that's true, then atheism is true, but you're not willing to say if that's true, then I'm just a monkey bot? And none of my arguments have any weight. And one configuration of matter energy cannot be superior in any way to any other configuration of matter energy in spacetime. Because you're jumping into the conclusion, if that's the case, then atheism is true. Wow, yay, let's celebrate. Let's have a little parade, okay? But there are other implications besides your silly atheism being true. There are other more obvious implications, one of them being that you're a monkey bot. Let that sink in.
Would
theism is false.
Are Mormons committed to a material God? You're going to know more about that than me.
I mean, in theory, yes. I don't actually know a lot about what Mormon philosophers would say about this. I don't know how many of them have sort of published on this issue or thought about it a lot. But I mean, the idea is that God is material in a sense, but not in the same sense as the material universe. It's like a finer materiality or something. So yeah, I'm actually not entirely sure about that. But I don't think that. I think you could still use this argument to deploy against it because it's not supposed to be a type of matter that we can describe scientifically.
This is all completely irrelevant. Mormons are not Christians. So this is supposed to be 500 arguments against Christianity. Mormons are not Christian. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of time-wasting banter here. I'm just going to put up with it, and maybe I'll comment once in a while.
Right, okay.
And so I think you could still use closure arguments against it. Not sure how a deist would sidestep some of these. If you're saying that
Deists are not Christians. Let's get on with the Christian stuff.
well, no, because we haven't appealed to miracles here. It's just the existence of God, right? So
yeah, I'm just thinking how, like ways that a theist could sort of accept the premises and kind of get out of it. Like maybe
Deists are not theists.
like a pantheist could, if they're like God.
Pantheists are not theists. Pantheists are not monotheists, right? They're monists. You boys really need to brush up.
oh yeah, a
material
pantheist
stuff.
could, like a materialist pantheist could, but that's a non-standard conception of God, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes I talk about theism to try to I vary the conclusions a little bit, but
Christianity is a monotheistic religion, guys. Wake up.
Yeah.
like a standard conception of God, I think this does rule out.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, and the last form we have is a Bayesian form, because of course we need more Bayesian inference in our lives. So now because all the Bayesian forms are pretty similar, so I'll just, in the future, we'll go through this more quickly, but because this is the first time. So T is the proposition God exists, T for theism, and then here I've called it E, but the lettering varies depending on what it is. So here's the proposition all effects have material causes, right? So so that's taken to be asserted in this case, right? Because all known effects have physical causes. Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're positing as being the case.
I'm just letting this run because I just want to get past it.
And the idea here is that the probability of all known effects having physical causes, given that theism is false, is much greater than the probability that all known effects have physical causes, given that theism is true. Because if theism was true, we might expect to, observe, or at least it's possible that we could observe effects that have non-physical causes, whereas that's much less likely if theism is false. And if you like, you could maybe replace that with naturalism to make that even stronger. But I think that the point still holds overall. If you consider those classes of theories, the probability would be much, much greater, which is what that means. Now, this second premise here is just saying that it's not the case that the prior probability of atheism is much, much less than the prior probability of theism. So this is adapted from, I think, a form of the fine-tuning argument that what's his face uses, Robin Collins, yeah, where this is a similar form that he has. So we're not making a statement about what the prior probabilities are, just that it's not, the prior of atheism is not way less than the prior of theism. And then it follows from that the the posterior probability of atheism, given all known effects have physical causes, is a lot greater than the posterior probability of theism, given this observation. So this is saying that this evidence updates us in favor of atheism.
This is such nonsense. You're wasting everyone's time. Bayesian arguments are out of place, to put it mildly, on those things that we have certain knowledge of, or that we're able to have certain knowledge of. For you would never use a Bayesian argument to talk about the probabilities of 1 being 1, or 1 plus 1 being 2, or 2 being greater than 1, or 1 being less than 2. There are things we can know by the light of natural reason without recourse to any faith-based belief, any faith-based beliefs. And so Bayesian logic does not apply to these things, okay, including the existence of the supernatural minds and of God. Okay, these are not up for debate. This is not a topic for Bayesian logic or probabilities or statistics or anything, guesswork or anything like that. So this is a complete waste of time.
So honestly, this is just a less transparent way of saying basically what we said in the previous 3 slides. But of course, if it's a Bayesian form, then it's a distinct argument, right? So that's the point here.
And Bayesianism means that you're extra big brain and
exactly, yeah. So it's it's super scholarly when it's Bayesian.
There's nothing impressive about misapplying something that's completely inappropriate. There's nothing big-brained or academic about that.
All right. Moving on. So that was the causal closure physical. So the quantum gravity argument. So I actually think this one's quite interesting. Our best theories of the origin of the universe posit a quantum gravity realm where causation breaks down. If causation breaks down in the quantum gravity realm, then God could not have caused the universe, because there's not a cause outside of space and time. If God exists, he caused the universe to begin, which theists typically hold. Therefore, God does not exist.
Here's a question though: is this argument going to be inconsistent with the previous ones about physical, or I guess you'd say whatever weird quantum stuff's going on is still physical?
Oh, you say that the causal closure of the physical. That's interesting. Yeah, you're probably going to need to talk there about what it counts as physical. So maybe at the point causation breaks down, you cease to call it physical as well. I'm not really sure about that.
Oh my God. Have you boys heard of the principle of equivalence by a little guy by the name of Einstein? You heard about that? E equals mc squared. Do you know about the principle of equivalence between matter and energy? Do you know that a quantum gravity field is not nothing? Even Lawrence Krauss admits in his book that a quantum field is not nothing. It's not nothing. Okay, so where did this quantum field come from? Explain that. It's not within the purview of the natural sciences to explain it. So you're going to have to explain it using your philosophy. Use your atheistic philosophy to explain to me where the quantum field came from. Where did this quantum gravity come from? Energy is physical. Matter is physical. Okay? Take a little introductory course to physics because you boys are out of your depth already.
Because, I mean, yeah, physical is not really well defined. I mean, you could call something physical if it is in the, how to phrase this? If it's part of the system of cause and effect of other physical things, then it's physical.
Right.
So then a realm of quantum gravity outside of that maybe counts as non-physical. Although that would just be like one way to define the physical.
We could define the physical as anything that's composite. Anything that has essence and existence. Boom. That's a composite being, and that is a physical being. It's subject to change, it's contingent, and all the rest.
Yeah, sorry, red herring.
No, I was just thinking about that. It's an interesting question. Yeah, so I mean, the point here...
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, in Chad and Cameron's video, they also had arguments that weren't consistent with each other, like from different like theologies and models of God and stuff like that. So I guess
some of these may well be inconsistent.
I should just qualify what I said. The subdomain of what I said, because the what I talked about, essence and existence, that also exists for the human soul, for the Satan and his demons. So we would have to take a subcategory of that broader category that I mentioned and talk about matter energy. This is probably the best definition of the physical. Matter energy in space-time. I think that's the best definition. But when you examine any instance of matter energy, it is composite, necessarily subject to change.
Consistent with each other. I haven't actually checked that.
But I mean, it might not be. I was just throwing that out there to derail the stream.
What was I going to say? Yeah. So the idea here is that if causation breaks down at quantum gravity realm, then it and the earliest parts of the universe are in like temporally earliest parts of the universe are in that quantum gravity realm.
Do these morons think that it's ever been observed, this quantum gravity creationism that they're fantasizing about? Do they think that it's been observed? Or do they realize that it's speculation based on mathematical models? This is so much... It's speculation on speculation on speculation on speculation. It's such a fantasy world that these people live in. And when I say these people, I mean Nathan and James, but atheists generally. It's a fantasy world. These physicists sell books to morons like James and Nathan because they're selling a dream. They're selling a fantasy. It has never been observed. The creation of the universe has never been observed by a physicist, an astronomer, or by anyone else. And if you want to tell me that you can look in a Hubble telescope and you can see way back in time and you can observe the quantum gravity field. Good luck with convincing me of that. You're really going to convince me that you've seen a quantum gravity field at the beginning of the material universe. Is that what you're going to tell me? This is modeling. It's sophisticated modeling based on a fairy tale, based on a fantasy, based on a whole buttload of assumptions. It's just nonsense. Just look at your first premise. Our best theories of the origin of the universe, our best theories, according to whom? And best of all time, the best today among the competing theories today. I mean, I've got a better theory for you. The uncaused first cause. Because anything other than the uncaused first cause as the creator of the universe, the natural world, anything other than that implies the complete contradiction entailed in circular causality. Circular causality, where the effect precedes its own cause. So we reject it and we accept the uncaused first cause as the source of all that we see in the laboratory and all we can witness in our day-to-day lives, everything that we see in the natural world, including humans who possess necessarily, logically, a supernatural mind, supernatural soul. We can know this with certainty. But you bozos don't know it. You don't know anything. You just have a fairy tale. You have a story given to you by secular scientists. All of these secular scientists who are pushing this garbage are very, very, very poor philosophers.
Then any events there don't have causes, and so it becomes impossible for God to cause the universe under that conception. That's the idea of this argument.
It's impossible for God not to have created the universe. There's literally no competing theory. There's no competing alternative. There is no alternative.
So that obviously depends on your conception of causality and so forth. Now, of course, we've got the modal version of that. It's possibly necessary that causation breaks down and so forth. And we've got the Bayesian form of that. Now, not every argument has all the formulations because some don't make sense. But pretty much all of them have at least multiple variations here.
My same critiques apply. The problem of induction is absolutely unreliable. It's not a reliable pathway to truth. And the Bayesian just does not apply to things that are not probabilistic, that are certain. We can know with certainty. We don't apply Bayesian logic to 1 + 1 = 2. We just know it deductively.
And, you know, a proposition like the universe had a quantum origin. Now, obviously, we don't know that for a certain, but I would say that's our best theory of, the ultimate origins at the moment. And so, you'd say, well, it's a lot more plausible than not. So even if Q is not taken as certain, you'd still say that observation or that proposition is evidence in favor of atheism over theism, which is what the Bayesian argument establishes. It doesn't say how high the posterior probability is. It just says that it's a lot higher than the posterior probability of theism, given the update based on this, because it's a conditional probability. It's just conditional on this observation. It's not saying what it would be if you condition it on all the other observations as well. All right. I'm
not mentioning that there's stuff going on in the chat, but I don't want to derail us even more than I've already done. Just so as I don't know how much you want to comment on. There's people talking about how they're idealists and they can sidestep all of this by doing idealism, which we're the point of this is to parody what Cameron's doing and point out that it's bad methodology. People talking about how their interpretation of quantum mechanics is going to get them out of the observer effects, debunk this. Let's not go down the rabbit hole.
Well, I don't want to talk about observer effects. Idealism is interesting though, because we are here to talk about the arguments to some extent. We're not going to defend all the arguments. That they didn't do that in their stream. I'm not going to do it in our stream. I'm just going to sort of talk through them briefly. Idealism is interesting though, because I'm wondering, I don't really know if that's even true, right? Because under idealism, there's still phenomena. And the question is, the expectedness of that phenomena under different hypotheses. So, traditionally, theism is a realist worldview, and so if you're a theistic idealist, I think you can still say. So
If you're a theistic idealist, you're not a Christian.
I guess there's 2 points here. First of all, the arguments are tailored towards a realist conception of theism, which I think is the standard form. But the second aspect is that I don't even know if you are like a theistic idealist that really changes a lot, because you could still ask, given theistic idealism, how would we expect things to be?
Yeah,
like,
the God mind
the quantum
simulation
origin?
would be a particular way. Yeah.
Would we expect that to be causally close within the simulation? Well, we wouldn't necessarily, right? Because God could intervene in the simulation. So I don't think that idealism really gets you around at least most of these arguments. Anyway, so yeah, I'm not so convinced about that. But I mean, obviously there are objections to these arguments, and we're not going to go through all the details of them. So that's sort of not the point here. Let's keep going. So this is kind of the classic, where did God come from? I don't think it's necessarily a good argument, but I thought I'd throw it in. Theists can't explain where God came from. If they can't explain where God came from, it's unreasonable to believe in God, so it's unreasonable to believe in God.
Oh my God. Strengthen me for this boring task. Okay, so we have the principle of sufficient reason, right? Everything has a reason. Your reason is either contained within yourself or in another. So the contingent beings have their being from another, and the one and only necessary being, the uncaused first cause, has his being in and of himself. This is philosophy 101. How do you boys sleep at night pushing this nonsense? Theists cannot explain where God came from, premise 1. How do you sleep at night pushing this absolute nonsense? Pick up an introductory textbook on classical theism. This is embarrassing. You're surrounded by books, both of you. I can see in your webcam, I can see books upon books. What are those books? Are they fairy tales, lies, Darwin, evolution theory? What is it? Because if you claim to be interested in theology, especially natural theology, philosophy, you're reading the wrong books, obviously, or you're just not digesting what you're reading.
This is persuasive to some people. I think
it's persuasive for atheists who just want to cling to their sin.
I think that it's interesting that theists won't find this persuasive, well, obviously, but they do find this persuasive when it's reversed. Like if you say atheists can't explain where the universe came from.
Yeah.
Atheists can't explain where the universe.
Atheists can explain where it came from. They can explain that it came from the uncaused first cause. And then they could just say, well, I don't think that's God, right? The uncaused, I'll grant you the uncaused first cause. I've had many conversations with atheists, and they say, well, I'll grant you that there must be an uncaused first cause. I'll grant you that. But can you please stop calling it God, because that makes me uncomfortable? They don't say that in those terms, but they say, why should I equate that with God? Well, because that's what God is. It's like if you are talking to a pagan sitting by an oak tree, and you say, this is an oak tree, and he says, yes, it is, and it's also my God. You can't say, well, I'll grant you that it's an oak tree, but I won't grant you that it's God. Because the pagan worships the oak tree as God, okay? He's wrong to worship the oak tree as God, but for you to try to argue him out of that, it's a manifest fact that that's his object of worship. He worships that thing, that contingent natural object. It's a foolish thing to worship and to adore as God. But he just told you that's what he's worshiping as God. It's absurd to deny that when the tree is manifest. You can reach out, you can touch it. And the pagan is manifest. You can reach out and touch him. You have ears to hear what he's saying. He says he worships God. He worships this oak tree as God. You have eyes to see. So when you say, I'll grant you, when the atheist says, I'll grant you that there must be an uncaused first cause, but I don't think that's God, you could say, well, that's fine. Just like I don't think that oak tree is God Almighty, but the pagan, I believe the pagan when he tells me that oak tree is his God. I just happen to think he's wrong, right? So if the pagan could convince someone that the oak tree, which is manifest, is God Almighty, good luck with that. But if he can, and obviously he can because paganism is thriving, then he'll gain adherence to his religion. And it's the same thing with me and my monotheism. If I can convince you, the atheist, that uncaused first cause, which you must acknowledge if you have two brain cells to rub together, and if you have free will, you're not a monkey bot and a slave to your animal passions, which is dimming your intellect and weakening your will and rendering you incapable of the most basic philosophical analysis, then I can convince you that uncaused first cause is the source of everything, that it has all the pure perfections, and that it alone is worthy of adoration as God.
This came from.
Well, I think this is why this is such a good argument, is because it's basically going to annoy the right people who are going to say, like, well, that's just, the question, like, God exists necessarily. Like,
no, we don't just hand wave. We assume the opposite. We say, well, let's say God does not exist. What does that mean? It means a circle of causality, which is absurd. So we reject that, and we're left with an uncaused first cause. It's that simple, guys. It's that simple.
And then, you get them to like really, really strongly commit to something like that, and then just offer that about the universe and see the reasons for why they reject it, and then offer them back, but replace the word universe with God and go in a big circle like that.
The universe is contingent, boys.
A good point, CJ. Even a weak argument does add to the probability, so it's all important here.
We don't need strength of arguments to convince us. It's not somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. It's 100% guaranteed and 100% certain that there is one and only one uncaused first cause, and that's what everyone calls God.
All right, let's see. And of course, there's a modal form because obviously anything about wait, hang on. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, sometimes the modal form is actually quite different. So this is quite a different formulation. It is possibly necessary that all persons have a causal origin. This is actually just, some of these are unique to me, and this is one that I just sort of thought up. It's possibly necessary that all persons have a causal origin. By S5, again, there's a premise here that I've sort of admitted. It is possible that one is true. Therefore, by S5, all persons have a causal origin. You can see there's a typo there. That should just say have a causal origin.
Necessarily.
God is defined to be a person with no causal origin. That's the standard definition of theism. So therefore, God does not exist. Again, like, well, if maybe there's some heterodox versions of theism.
Look, premise 1 says there's no uncaused first cause, but we know by the light of natural reason, without recourse to faith or any faith-based beliefs or any revelation or anything like that, we know with certainty that there must be necessarily one and only one uncaused first cause. That's the only necessary being, that than which nothing greater can be thought. We know that. You're wasting a lot of time with really, really inane arguments here. This is Logic 101, Philosophy 101, Classical Theism 101, and you boys just don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Theism that could escape this argument, but I think 3 is pretty standard conception of theism. So, of course, you could reject 1, but then you could say, well, it seems that there's a lot of evidence in favor of this. You could maybe make a conceivability objection if you think conceivability is an argument for points to possibility. So there's things to be said about that.
Okay, the fact that James thinks that evidence can help his cause is so laughable. All evidence, by the very fact that it can be placed under a microscope or examined by a scientist, all this evidence, these are all natural effects, right? They're natural, right? You admit that, right? So it's all contingent. So we're right back where we started. You can't point to evidence to support atheism because all of the evidence just reinforces the certainty that we have that there is and must be one and only one necessary being that is the uncaused first cause. To talk about evidence is a complete embarrassment.
And there's an inductive version of that. So every known person has a causal origin. The God hypothesis says that God is a person with no causal origin. Therefore, we have inductive evidence to believe that there is no God.
Oh, Lord. Every known person. So is God a known person or an unknown person? You could argue both ways, right? God is unknowable, etc., and so on. There are many theologians that will admit that. So if you want to say that, if you want to say only creatures are caused, fine. But then you can't use God in premise 2, right? You're doing a category error here. You're switching it up. But if you want to say that God is a known person, because we don't comprehend God, but we apprehend God in prayer and in religious life and in contemplation, if you want to admit that God is a known person, then premise 1 is false because we know that God is uncaused. So either way you approach this, it's just nonsense, and it just betrays a total lack of understanding of natural theology, philosophy, classical theism. You boys are out of your depth.
Again, it's similar to how Craig makes these sort of arguments that, well, we have lots of evidence that all persons have causal origins, so it seems implausible to think that God's the exception to that.
It's the evidence, all these contingent beings, that force the thinking person to conclude that there must be one and only one uncaused first cause. How many times am I going to say this during this 7-hour video?
All right, and yeah, so that was the last example of that. Now, this one, yes, so some of these arguments are borrowed from the list of 100 arguments for atheism put out by
Felipe Leon.
Yeah, that's right, Felipe Leon. So some of these are adopted from there, actually, or taken from papers that he links to.
It's sad to think about academia being bloated with so much bullshit and nonsense. Excuse my language. Academia is bloated with pseudoscience, pseudo-philosophy, pseudo-theology. It's nonsense. It's an embarrassment.
All right, so I think this is one of them. I haven't put citations in, by the way. Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say at the beginning. I've deliberately decided not to put citations in for these. So, of course, that means that they're all irrelevant and you don't have to believe any of them. So it's all right.
But that's just the futility of the atheistic worldview anyway. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Just two moist robots trying to get more and more serotonin and dopamine. Like
moist robots, yeah, monkey bots.
What?
Not actually, but in their own conception, according to their own stupid worldview.
No ultimate meaning.
No meaning, exactly. You nailed it.
So this is sort of, yeah, I mean, a variation of the argument I just gave, essentially. But this is appealing to all concrete entities rather than all persons. All concrete entities have an explanation outside themselves. God is said to be a concrete entity with no explanation outside himself, so he doesn't exist.
I don't know what a concrete entity is, but if you are saying in premise 2 that God is a concrete entity, then 1 is false, right? By definition, because the contingent implies the necessary. The principle of sufficient reason says there are 2 ways to have your being, from yourself or from another, right? This is not rocket science, people. You're assuming what you want to prove. It's called begging the question, circular reasoning. It's a fallacy. Your whole package here of 500 plus arguments, and we're already on number 12, it's full of these fallacies, begging the question.
And you could appeal to all sorts of, you could appeal to philosophical arguments in favor of one. You could appeal to empirical arguments in favor of one. You know, you could do a big song and dance about that. Of course, there's a modal form of that. You know, it's possibly necessary that all concrete entities have an explanation outside themselves. Possibly, all concrete entities have an explanation outside themselves. So by S5, all concrete entities have an explanation outside themselves, and therefore God does not exist. And there's an inductive form of that, which is the same thing again. All known concrete entities have explanations outside themselves. I should say a concrete entity is something that has like causal powers. So like abstract objects are not concrete entities, they're abstract. So concrete entities would include physical objects as well as something like God or spirits that have any kind of causal powers or can interact with the world.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. Now I agree that God is, according to your definition, a concrete entity. Thanks for the explanation.
Okay, so moving on. The atheistic kalam. Now, this one is basically just standard kalam. So the first premise is the same. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. But the second premise just denies that the universe began to exist, right?
One
so it
man's
did not have a
modus
cause.
ponens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But if God exists, then the universe was caused. And so it follows that if the universe did begin to exist, then God didn't begin to exist. So
If you haven't noticed, I sped up the video because this is painfully boring and repetitive. This is just heaps and heaps of the same nonsense. Number one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. That is absolutely true. The universe did not begin to exist. That is false. Therefore, the universe did not have a cause. That is false. If God exists, he caused the universe. That is true. Therefore, God does not exist. That is false. So let's look at this again. They're saying that the universe does not have a cause. We know that that's false because of precisely because of the contingent nature of the universe. Right? There are two options. A circle of cause and effect, which is absurd, or an uncaused first cause. It's the same thing over and over again.
Really, you just have to defend premise 2 here, and then you would just appeal to philosophical or scientific arguments in favor of that. Now, the standards, like the philosophical arguments that use for the kalam, would be against the impossibility of an actual infinite. But it seems to me here, you could just deploy arguments from the impossibility of a cause of the universe. Like, well, take the theories of causation. It seems that most of them don't make any sense of how the universe could have a cause. Like the universe is all space and time, and causation is like something that happens in time, so how could it have a cause?
The reason that we know the natural is not the whole story. The reason we know there's something above the natural, beyond the natural, aka the supernatural. That's why we call it the supernatural, above the natural. The reason we know that with certainty, even though it's freaky and wild and weird, just like people get excited about the quantum effect because they're freaky and wild and weird, right? But the reason we know that there is a supernatural realm is because of pure reason, not guesswork, not probability, not evidence in the sense that you use the word evidence in terms of like forming probabilistic Bayesian arguments. No. But because the evidence itself is contingent always. And so to avoid the absurdity of a circle of causation, we have to admit, we are forced by logic to admit that there is one and only one uncaused first cause that is necessarily supernatural, not composed of parts, not subject to change.
So you could develop arguments along these lines to show that it's unreasonable to think that the universe could have a cause. So it's basically just an inversion. And theists only think about doing this one way, so they never think about the possibility you could just do it the opposite way.
You can't just do logic the opposite way. There's logic and reasoning and philosophy, when done properly, lead us to the truth. Right? You don't just have a preferred way of living and then so you adopt the preferred label for your lifestyle or your worldview, and then you go ahead and justify it using deduction. It's not like that. You can only justify perversion by an abuse of logic, by an abuse of deduction, by an abuse of induction, by an abuse of abduction and the Bayesian form of argument. You can't reverse a syllogism and argue for the opposite. It's complete nonsense.
Yeah, especially, I guess the interesting thing about that is, I mean, if you're a naturalist, you're naturally going to, I mean, trivially, naturally going to deny at least one of the premises in their deductive argument, and then if you just like plug that in, but with the other premises, it's generally just going to like run the opposite way.
Yeah, well, that's one of the points to be made about these. I think it's really amusing that there are some people in the chat saying how terrible these arguments are. It's like, well, watch Cameron's stream. I don't think it's any worse than that. Anyway, so we're not defending the arguments. We're just sort of giving some thoughts about them. Anyway, so.
Okay, so you don't have any confidence that these are good arguments? What's the point? Why not, if his arguments, if this Cameron guy or whoever it was that you're talking about, I have no idea, if his arguments are flawed, then refute them. If someone gives me directions, if I ask directions on the street and someone says turn left and then right, and then the guy next to him says, oh no, those are bad directions, turn go back 2 streets and hang a left. And when I say your directions were bad, he says, well, the other guy's directions were bad too. Does this sound like someone that loves the truth to you? Does it sound like someone that wants to be helpful? Or does it sound like someone that's in love with themselves, in love with their sin? And just wants to appear helpful, appear creative, appear intelligent, appear educated? Well, you've had your reward. I hope you've enjoyed this, because it's not doing you any favor in terms of your eternal destination. So enjoy your little mini victory here with your smoke and mirror show, because it's all nonsense and we can see right through it.
This is a modal version, so again, it's a possibly necessary version. Won't get over that. An inductive version. So this is similar to a form that we talked about before, but now it is framed in the context of an argument that the universe didn't begin to exist. So everything that begins to exist has a material cause, or maybe I could even say a sufficient material cause, but I don't think you need that here. The universe began. So again, obviously this is different from the previous one, which said the universe didn't begin, but this is a different approach. So it follows that the universe had a material cause if everything that begins to exist has a material cause. Now, the thing about this is that it's almost identical. The first premises here are almost identical to Craig's formulation of the Kalam, except I've added material in here. And it seems to me that anything that Craig will say in defense of his first premise, you could say in defense of this premise as well, like the inconceivability argument and popping into existence argument and the inductive argument and so forth. And so that gets you to a conclusion that the universe had a material cause, but God caused the universe without a material cause, at least ultimately. There was an ultimate action of creation that didn't require a material cause because God's not material. So from that, you get that God doesn't exist. All right.
Just want to point out that God uses secondary causation.
Oops, did I? Yeah, okay, next one. Argument from imperfect.
God is obviously has a primary causation. But as I said earlier, when I quoted St. Thomas Aquinas, God created the natural realm. He set out to create nature and the natural realm, and he was not frustrated in his design. It's a well-ordered material universe in the natural realm. There are secondary causes, okay? It's not like God is doing a miracle on every single cause and effect in the universe. He created nature. That's what he wanted to do, and he was not frustrated in his design. Does he intervene? Does he make miracles? Yes, he does. Do those violate his laws? No. Truth never contradicts truth.
Perfection. So this is one that I'm increasingly interested in, actually. And I think it's called this because, I borrowed it from a paper, this particular formulation. So if God is, well, that's the idea. All of the specific syllogisms are my formulation, but the arguments are often borrowed from elsewhere. If God existed, he would have no reason to create the material universe. Theism holds that God created the universe for a reason, therefore theism is false.
Oh my God. If God existed, he could have no reason to create the material universe. Says who? Is this one of the dogmas of your stupid religion? Says who? Have you heard of the principle of sufficient reason? Everything has a reason. Everything has a sufficient reason. Everything. No matter how trivial, no matter how small and apparently unnoticed by sentient beings. Everything has a reason for its existence and for its place in the big picture. God himself has a reason. His reason is in himself. Everything else has reasons in other beings. So premise 1 is false.
So, I mean, I think could reject 2 by just saying that God created the universe for no reason. But I think that's non-standard.
Yeah.
And hard to reconcile. Remember, these are actually supposed to be arguments against Christianity. So if you like, you could just make it a specific argument against a Christian God by saying, like, Christianity holds that God created the universe. So go ahead.
I think in this case, when I've talked to theists about this, that they're actually just happy to hold 2 inconsistent beliefs. So they'll believe that a model of God existed who's entirely self-sufficient, so has no reason to create a material universe. But then they'll also believe that, God desires a family or something like that.
There's no contradiction between saying that God needs nothing. He needs nothing. He needs nothing. And yet he created the universe. There's no contradiction there. If you see a contradiction there, it's because you don't understand philosophy, theology, or God himself, right? So there's no contradiction. And I'll go even further and say that there are no contradictions. There are no genuine contradictions, period. In God, outside of God, in the interaction between God and his creation, there are no contradictions anywhere. 0 contradictions ever. Zero genuine contradictions. Are there apparent contradictions? Yes, they abound. Just like the stumbling stones abound for the atheist who loves the creature more than his creator. They abound.
And they're just like happy to sit with that tension and not actually like draw out any contradiction.
There's a difference between tension, which is inevitable because of the finite nature of our intellects. There is tension in me just because of the fact that I am finite and I'm aware of the infinite. So that's one tension. There's another tension in the fact that I have a supernatural mind, a supernatural soul, and a physical body. There's a tension there. But there's no contradiction, obviously, because it's manifest. This is what we call a mystery. It doesn't mean that it's irrational or unreasonable, but it goes beyond reason. So tension is something we all live with. But contradiction is something that none of us live with. There's no genuine contradiction ever. There are stories of contradiction. There's apparent contradiction. There are models that are not coherent and therefore contain these theoretical contradictions. Like if I say 1 equals 2, it's a fantasy story about contradiction, but 1 does not equal 2. There is no contradiction. When I say 1 equals 2, or 2 plus 2 equals 5, my lips, my tongue, my vocal cords, my whole body, and the air around me that's moving and vibrating is all conforming with God's laws, the natural laws, the physical laws. There's no contradiction there. I often say that it's impossible to lie because everything is true. There's just the fantasy of the lie. There's the story of the lie. And this is the difference. There are no contradictions. But you can spin a web of deceit. But if you examine, you zoom in on that web of deceit that you've woven with your mind, with your supernatural mind, when you say there's no God, we evolved from apes, and sodomy is good, masturbation is good, pornography is good, prostitution is good. You're not violating any of the laws of nature. You're not. Everything that you're engaged in, whether it's thinking, speaking, writing, doing, enacting, dancing, publishing propaganda for your cult, all of that is ontologically good. It's all good. But the way that you're acting, the way that you're behaving, the way that you're thinking is falling away from the good. It's evil. It's falling away from being. So to understand who and what you are, what your human nature is, and the nature of God, not that we can comprehend even ourselves, much less God, but to apprehend it and to have a basic Catholic understanding of human nature and the nature of God will radically change your perception of how to do philosophy, how to do logic, and what is a contradiction, what is truth, what are lies. Changes everything, transforms everything. So Nathan, I don't believe that you were ever a monotheist. I don't believe you were ever a Christian. I could be wrong. I'd love to chat with you again on my live stream, on one of your live streams, but you've strayed so far from Christ and his church, and you've strayed so far from classical theism and the beautiful, wholesome, certain truths of classical theism that I think you really need help. You really need to sit down and talk with someone. If it's not me, then find someone else who understands the fundamental, basic philosophy 101 of metaphysics, ontology, epistemology, and all the rest. You need to start over. If you want to apply radical doubt and go to hard solipsism and start building from there, I don't think that'll help you, because you told me that you were a hard agnostic, what I might call a soft solipsist, and you fell into atheism. So I don't know if you have the mental toughness to go that route. You may need to go another way. But there's still a philosophical basis that you need to build if you're going to have any chance of becoming a monotheist. And once you're a monotheist, you're pretty much home free at that point. If you become a devout Jew, a devout Muslim, a devout Christian, I'll be ecstatic for you. We very little doubt that you're well on your way into the Catholic Church.
Yeah, so I've heard you say something like that. It's in the nature of God to be creative or to
it flows from his creative nature. Yeah, to create.
Which doesn't make sense because that would seem to be saying that there's something lacking about what he was initially, such that he has to move beyond that. I don't know how you can hold both of those.
Actually, if you think he desires a family or something, then it's like, well, how can you say that he's like self-sufficient because he's not got something that he wants there? Like, or I guess you could just define all the terms in like these. Well, when it's like divine self-sufficiency, it's like this special like.
Yeah, well, you just end up with a lot of words defined in very special ways that apply only to God. When it just looks more and more ad hoc, I believe. I think causation's like that with the Kalam. Actually, I think that the only instance where that brand of causation has happened is when God created the universe. It seems to me. But anyway, so I think this is quite an interesting argument.
Would you not expect to be surprised by God and his attributes? And it says, not that you have any reason to believe the holy books of any monotheistic religion, but it says in the Bible, my ways are not your ways, says the Lord. My thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord. So would you not expect, really, honestly, sincerely, would you not, in your heart of hearts, would you not expect that if monotheism is true, and God is a personal God, would you not expect to be surprised? Would you not expect to be delighted and astounded by God's truth and by his revelation? Would you not expect that? Seriously. You've got to raise your bar just a little bit because you're setting your bar way too low in terms of what you think God would be if he existed from your atheistic perspective. You're setting your bar way too low. If God is just a moronic human, then yeah, he's like you. But he's not a moronic human. He's God Almighty. Put some respect on his name.
And of course, there's a modal form of the argument. It's possibly necessary if God existed and have no reason, so that's quite natural there. And there's a Bayesian form of the argument, of course, based on the fact that the immaterial universe does exist. So if God is perfectly self-sufficient, then why did he make the universe? Okay, now this is an interesting argument. Quentin Smith's self-caused universe argument. So here's the idea. Quentin Smith here says that a collection has a cause if and only if all of its elements have causes. So you can say like a period of time has a cause if all of the elements, like instance say of that time period, have a cause. And so the second premise then is the universe is simply the set of all spatio-temporal events, which is a pretty standard way of conceiving of the universe. Now, if there's a cosmic singularity, then every spatio-temporal event in the universe could have had a prior cause. So basically that's saying that this is an argument that's saying there was no first event of the universe. For every event that occurred, there was an event before that. So people know about the Grim Reaper's paradox. It's basically a variant, or it's the same idea here. So for this to hold, then time would have to be infinitely divisible, but I mean, it could be as far as we know. I mean, quantum theory maybe would say it is, but we don't necessarily know that, and this is a philosophical argument anyway. So the idea here is that, if you imagine going back to the first nanosecond, well, you can have the first half nanosecond or the first half, picosecond or whatever it is going down. And so each event before had a cause before that and before that, and there was no first cause. So what Quentin Smith is saying here is that every spatio-temporal event in the universe could have had a prior cause, and that means that the set of all events had a prior cause. But the set of all causes and events in the universe just is the universe, and so therefore the universe has a cause internal to itself. So this is the sense in which it's self-cause.
Okay, we need to make the distinction between logically prior and temporally prior. Okay, God is not temporally prior to the natural realm that he created. He did not create the natural realm in time. He did not sit down at a workbench and build the universe. God is logically prior, but he's not temporally prior because God created space-time. He created matter energy. I can't believe I have to explain this basic metaphysics to two people who claim to be interested in philosophy. I'm going to just hop over now to the live chat because I see Jay over here. Hi, Jay. How are you doing? Jay's the one who got me started on this. I don't know if I should thank you or curse you, Jay, because this is a nightmare. These morons are frustrating me. But no, I'm just being silly. But thank you very much, Jay. I appreciate it. God bless you. Glad to see you here in the live chat. Glad to take a little break from this frustrating task that you set me up with. And then we've got Wellmaker, DSW2315, a real catchy name you got there. Hi. He created out of desire, not need. Yeah, that's we have to speak of God in analogous terms, using analogies, and the via negativa is a healthy antidote to anthropomorphism. So it's a touchy subject, but I'm very casual. I'm very flippant with my anthropomorphisms, and because I know I have I'm grounded. My monotheism is grounded in pure reason, natural theology, philosophy. And I'm not in danger of falling into Mormonism or any bizarre non-monotheistic religion. I'm just not. Hinduism or Buddhism or anything else. Idealism. I'm well grounded in classical theism, aka monotheism. So I'm happy to say that God desires. And we cannot possibly comprehend God. God is a mystery. But we know we have the manifest reality in this natural world that forces us to draw many certain conclusions about God, his pure perfections. And that's enough. That's enough to inspire awe, fear meaning we don't want to offend God. It's enough to motivate us to strive sincerely every day and every moment of every day to know God, to love God, and to serve God in this world so we can be happy with him and forever in the next life. So I guess end of rant. I'll just continue this boring task.
And because God is outside the universe, if the universe is self-caused, then God didn't cause the universe. So if God is thought to have been the being that caused the universe, then God doesn't exist under this understanding. And of course, there's a modal form of that, naturally. Anything you want to say about that argument?
No. I was just thinking. There was a similar argument to the sort of self-sufficiency idea that I can't remember if you put one in that was like it. That is from one of Oppie's books, and he just kind of throws it out there. Like I think again, he's
I interviewed Oppie if you want to go and listen to that.
talking about, like, you know, if we think that this is a useful way of going about things, we can just create like random arguments. Like, here's an example. If God exists, God's the perfect ex nihilo creator of the universe. Our universe is imperfect. The actions of a perfect being cannot decrease the degree of perfection in the world. So if God exists, then prior to all creation, the world is perfect. You know, like running it kind of that, rather than from the self-sufficiency of God, running it from like the perfection of God and this world being imperfect to show that it can't be created. And
well,
it's a dogma of the church that God created a good world. There's another dogma that says God could have created an even better world, right? So much for critiquing Leibniz, and Voltaire famously made fun of Leibniz for the best of all possible worlds and all that sort of thing. Well, that's not what Catholicism teaches. That's not what Christianity teaches. Okay, so this idea of a perfect world, if we go back in time 6, 7, 8, 9,000 years, whatever it is, when God created the entire universe out of nothing, we'll see that this good world that God created was free from suffering, from death, from thorns and thistles, from hatred, anger, all these things. Okay? But it did contain another good, a very dangerous good, and that good was free will. And with the gift, the good gift of free will, comes the possibility of abusing that good gift. By the very nature of free will, it is subject to abuse. And of course, God knew that. God knows everything. But if you're going to love God, you have to love God freely. It's the only way. So far from detracting from God's goodness, this fallen world with all the sin, all the chaos, all the imperfections that are creeping in more and more and more, and the world's falling away from God and falling away from being and falling away from goodness. Despite all of that, we know with certainty that God is good. God created a good world. God gave us the good gifts, including the good gift of free will, which was necessarily subject to abuse. We did abuse it. I think inevitably. I think it was inevitable. And in hindsight, I think we can say, yes, it was inevitable. But in spite of all that, we know that the suffering here is nothing compared to the sufferings of hell. We know that the sufferings here are nothing compared to the sufferings of purgatory. If you're Catholic and you're listening to this, if you're Christian and you're listening to this, think about that, meditate on that. And we know, of course, that the sufferings here below are nothing compared to the joys, the pleasures of heaven, being with God forever. So think about that. Think about that daily, all day, every day.
We've got plenty of teleological arguments coming up.
The evolutionary evil arguments and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, I think that there are some good considerations here that we've raised and will continue to raise. The part that's silly is the fact that we're just formulating them in slightly, subtly different ways and saying that they're like separate arguments. That's really stupid. But of course, the whole point of this stream is to make that point, right? Yeah. And there's a whole industry of apologists doing this. And I think that actually Chad's stream or Chad's PowerPoint showed that of how many papers there are publishing basically this just slightly different forms of the same argument.
Okay, once again, with the two people giving bad directions on the street, I'm a visitor to your city and you're not representing your city very well, because the first guy gave me bad directions. And the first guy's friend or enemy or whatever he is, the guy next to him, gave me bad directions, worse directions. When I asked him why, when I came back and asked him why, he said, oh, because the first guy gave you bad directions. So I'm showing you that I too can give bad directions. You're not doing yourself any favors, you're not doing me any favors, and you're giving your group a bad name.
So if there's any universities watching that want to, give me and James tenure, and we can do this just all day.
Yeah, I know. We can just spend all day every day going up.
They're laughing, but I mean, this is the sad reality. We live in a world where bullshit is king. The emperor wears no clothes, and he's proud. He's proud dancing around with his pot belly and his little wee hanging out. Okay? He's proud, and everyone else is proud in his retinue. They're all proud to be part of the king's court. It's ridiculous. We live in a clown world.
With just new arguments for the same thing. All right. Now, this is an argument that I pinched from, what's his name again?
Felipe Leon?
Felipe Leon, yeah. I was going to say something else that would have been very wrong. So, Felipe Leon, the argument for the existence of non-deity. So this is sort of related to the idea that God wouldn't create. So if the theistic God were to exist, he would create a world containing only gods. Or specifically, it's that if he were to create anything, it would be only other gods. So beings that possess most or all of his attributes. Well, I guess it could be all, but at least most of his attributes, like moral perfection, for example. But of course, the existing world does not contain only gods because there's non-God things that exist. So therefore, the theistic God does not exist.
Okay. Premise 1. If the theistic God were to exist, then he would create a world containing only God. Says who? Says who? Is this a dogma of your silly religion? Says who? God would create beings that possess most of his attributes. Says who? Only God has the pure perfections. We have impure perfections. Okay? We are not omnipotent. We are not omnibenevolent. We are not omnipresent, etc. Okay, do we participate in life? Yes, we do, to a certain limited extent. Do we participate in goodness and unity and justice and truth and health and beauty? Do we participate more or less in many of the attributes of God? Yes, we do. We do. In a very finite, limited way, imperfect way, impure way. Now, the question to you is, what is manifest in the world that you inhabit? Because the world that I inhabit, I see sin and the effects of sin, and I see people falling away from truth and goodness and beauty, and I see ugliness, but I also see that everything that is, to the extent that it is ontologically good. Okay, I see that every composite matter energy configuration in space-time is contingent, and that leads me to God. So I don't put the horse before the cart. I see manifest reality. I see that it's not gods walking the earth. I see that it's flawed, fallen, sinful, selfish, stinky humans. But using pure reason, I deduce, without any Bayesian formulation, I deduce with 100% certainty that God exists. And that I must, if I am to be happy, I must strive to know him, to serve him, to love him in this life, so I can be happy with him forever in the next life.
Again, premise two is obviously true. And the
Premise two is always true, possibly necessarily.
Possibly. Yeah, so because the argument is valid, it follows logically and inescapably that the theistic God does not exist. And the idea of one here is just that, like, well, why would God create something that is lacking in perfections? Like, if it would create anything, it would be something that has the perfections at least almost as much as he does, or as close to the maximum level as you can get without impinging on his glory or something. So, yeah, there's more discussion of this in the paper, but I thought this was kind of an interesting argument.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a modal form of that argument.
So there's some theists
and an abductive form. Sorry,
some theists would be able to deny it by saying that we are gods and we become gods by donating to Joel Osteen and the prosperity gospel and those sorts of people. Or even that's the parody of Mormonism that's always given out, isn't it? The like you get your own planet.
Yes, that's right. That's all other kettle of worms. Maybe one of these days we can get a Mormon apologist to come on and I can talk to him about that.
We're just showing that all of these other sort of candidate religions outside of Christian theism are just more plausible because they can, they can deal with
they can avoid these. Yeah, that's a good point.
Objections.
Yeah. So by the way, a lot of these I just talk about God, but if you want to be more specific, you can just replace it with Christian God if that's preferable. And so I guess the argument that way. Yes, that's the abductive form that contains many entities that are not gods. Best explanation why there are so many non-deities is the world was not created. So we have reason to believe that theistic God does not exist. And of course, the Bayesian form as always. All right. So those are all the cosmological arguments. Basically, to summarize those, they relate to basically the idea that the universe can't have had a cause or can't have been caused by God or wouldn't have been created by God in the first place if a God existed. So,
do they think they've proven any of those? Seriously.
So now we're moving on to the teleological arguments, which relate to the design of the universe. And this is where you get into arguments from poor design. So hence the first one. If God designed the natural world would be well designed. Many aspects of the natural world are not well designed, therefore God did not design the natural world.
If the natural order is not well ordered, then kiss goodbye to natural science and the scientific method, okay? You have no idea what you're talking about.
So it's kind of easy to come up with things that are not well designed. One of my favorite examples from the natural world is that I should have looked this up. Isn't there a nerve from the giraffe that wraps up right around?
Did you see Doug's stream where he talked to a Muslim who was in medical school about this?
Okay, I'm going to let this drivel play out, but before they continue, I just want to mention that if you design the best building or vehicle, it's going to fall apart. I'm sorry to tell you, it's going to fall apart. Why? Is it because God is evil, or is it because we fell from God's grace in the Garden of Eden? Which do you think is more plausible? Okay, so the beautiful car that was well designed, it falls apart over time. Why is that? Who's to blame for that? Decay and devolution. Who's to blame for that? Is it God, who's all good and deserving of all our love? Or is it the fall in the garden? The fall of Adam and Eve, our first parents. Which do you think is more plausible?
No,
I'm not saying the guy he didn't give a response that convinced me, but like some theists are obviously like aware of these like arguments and they'll say, but yeah, like the same thing when I did my interview with Matthew Cobb on the idea of the brain, where there's like there are these nerves where like if you were designing it, you just go from like here to like here, and but instead it like goes around the heart and like comes up. But also I think
a lot of examples like that.
Yeah, you know that in the natural sciences, people, for example, the vestigial organs, people just dismiss this as poor design, and then decades later, oh, it turns out it's part of our immune system, or turns out it's part of this, part of this system. Oh, finally we have the technology to realize that this form has function. Wow, who knew?
Like cruciate ligaments that always snap in like people or like dogs and stuff like that. Like they're really bad design. People getting like CTE from like playing football, like heading the ball all the time and stuff like that. Like brains are not particularly well designed for our human existence.
The human retina is back to front.
Yeah, like
God's face back into the skull rather than forwards.
Yeah, that's why. And also, like, well. I mean, like if you think of dualism and like occasionalism, where God lines it up, and it's like the idea that God's a deceiver if he, if he's lining up like us getting like false perceptions of the world. But if you think of the way that the human brain's designed, like we're really prone to perceiving illusions in things. Like where for example, like I forget which part of our like anatomy it is, but it's to do with like the way that light falls on like a concave or a convex shape and stuff like that. So you can like create all these illusions where we like start inferring, like concave or convex when things actually aren't, and we get confused and form false beliefs. And so God's like sort of created the perceptual apparatus in us that does that. Unless obviously you can come up with like a story that, well, it wasn't like that. We had a brilliant 20/20 vision that was perfect before the fall, and it's only because of sin.
The fall is a get out of jail free card. But I mean, it doesn't really matter if it was caused by the fall or not, because God still created the universe that would have a fall in it. So I don't really see how that's never really made sense to me.
I've already explained the free will thing. Free will is a good gift. I think it's the best gift because it allows us to love, right? built into the good gift of free will is the possibility of abusing that good gift. I'll probably have to say this time and time again during this long, boring, inane video.
Or it's like, well, Adam chose to do that, or Adam and Eve chose, but it's like, well, yeah, but God set everything up such that one choice would lead to everything else being screwed. So it's still bad design. Like, it's like if you put the chinaware just on the very edge of the of your I can't think of words of the cabinet or the table or whatever. Yeah, and the kid comes in and bumps into it, and you're like, well, the kid should have been playing in there. Yeah, but you're the one who put it there and allowed the kid to bump into it so that it smashed. So it's still on you, right? It's still badly designed if that's the case.
Yeah, well, any school, have you been to school? You know, the multiple choice tests, they're designed for you to have the possibility of answering wrongly. Are you aware of that? They're actually designed to test you. They're designed to test you. It's part of your education. And if you're studious, and if you're diligent, and if you care about your education, you'll advance through the grades. You'll learn a whole bunch of stuff. You'll make mistakes along the way. And you'll have the love and support of your family and friends all along the way. And then you live happily ever after. And it's a happy story, right? Because having the possibility to answer an exam question in the right way necessarily involves the possibility that there are other options whereby you could answer it in the wrong way. And it doesn't have to be multiple choice. I'm just using that to simplify.
But yeah, like I guess like cataracts in vision and like hay fever, that's a big one. Like that's super inconvenient. Like literally allergic to the pollen that trees and grass is spreading around. What else can I think of? Oh, like toe bunions. Like you got to walk around and you start getting like ingrown toenails. Like you cut your toenail.
Oh yeah,
wrong,
that's
like,
super annoying.
Yeah.
None of this was in the Garden of Eden before the fall. None of it. None of these things you're complaining about. No bad breath in the Garden of Eden.
So yeah, you can think of lots of examples of this. It's just not really that hard. There's many examples of this that are pretty hard to understand if God made the natural world well designed. And I don't think the fall is a very good objection to this.
You don't? What's your explanation? A circle of cause and effect? Is that your explanation? Grow up.
Well, it's a modal form. It is possibly necessary that God exists in the natural world be well designed. It is possible that if God exists in the natural world be well designed. Therefore, from S5, then it would be well designed, and so forth. Now we have an inductive form of that. So just saying there are lots and lots of cases. Cases of poor design are unexpected if God exists. So we have evidence that God does not exist. The more cases we have there. Abductive form, there are numerous cases of poor design. The best explanation of this is that nature was not designed by an omni-being. So I guess you could still have a non-omnipotent God creating here, but at least the standard form wouldn't expect this if he was in charge. So therefore, reasonably, that nature was not designed by an omni-God. And a Bayesian form, of course. The observation that nature is badly designed is much more plausible under atheism than under theism. All right, the argument from abstruse design. I'm trying to remember this one. This was an interesting one. Yeah.
Human discoverability.
I can't remember if this is one I borrowed or this is one I made up. There's too many arguments. They're all mixed up in my head. So if God designed the natural world, the laws of nature would be designed to aid in human discoverability. I think that this is an argument that I made to parody the argument from the design argument from Design for Discoverability, which I think is very silly. So the laws of human nature have not been designed to aid human discoverability. Therefore, God does not design the natural world. So premise 2 would be justified on the basis that the laws of nature are just extremely complicated and very hard to understand.
Laws of nature are not complicated. The history of science is constantly simplifying these laws, right? That's the whole point of the models that we build in the natural sciences. That's why we get bonus points for the most elegant solution to a problem, even a well-known problem on an exam in undergrad physics course. You can get bonus points depending on how elegant your solution is. This is the beauty of the natural sciences. It encourages more and more elegant formulations, more and more collapsing of, using Occam's razor to sort of get rid of clutter. This is why we have a whole realm of quantum mechanics, because Newtonian mechanics are too cumbersome. So we have always the possibility of approaching a more and more simple, more simplified, more elegant expression of the natural laws. The natural laws are not complicated. They're just mind-boggling, and they are wonderful and awesome, but they're not complicated.
And very hard to discover. So it seems that if God wanted us to understand those, he could have done a much better job there.
And another thing is that we don't get to heaven by having a deep knowledge of nature, right? Beyond understanding that God created the entire natural world. He created the human nature, male and female human natures, and that non-human material beings have their own unique natures with their own limitations, and that you cannot get a more perfect nature from a less perfect nature. There goes Darwin and all the post-Darwinian theories of evolution, right? The principle of proportionate causality. You can kiss natural science goodbye if you're willing to embrace any theory of evolution. You've sawed off the very branch upon which you're so proudly and smugly sitting with your science, 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 trust the science. Well, you should learn what science is and how it works.
And premise one is basically, I mean, not every theist would accept that, but a lot of theists seem to be arguing that lately. So I just sort of said, well, if you think that, then let's stick that in and then see what we can infer from that. So that's what I call abstruse design. And of course, there's a modal form of that and an inductive form. So this is a slightly different version here. The laws of nature are extremely complex and difficult to discover, which I think not too many people would disagree with. If God designed the natural world for humans to inhabit, one would be unexpected. So we wouldn't expect the laws of nature to be so complex and difficult because apparently God wants us to understand the regularities of the world and predict the consequences of our actions, right? Because that's important for free will. So we would expect it to be easier to understand the laws of nature. And therefore, we have strong inductive reason that God did not design the world for humans.
The interesting thing I think about these arguments is if you look at like the history of Christianity and a lot of the ideas that were like prevalent through like Catholicism, for example, that inheriting from like Aristotelianism, the idea that the intellect is like this special thing in humans that's God given, and so and we can like investigate the world using the intellect to comprehend it. Well, look just how wrong their like physics and maths and philosophy was like at the time that they believed that as well. Like we've made so much progress since then, and I think there's good like sort of skeptical arguments to be made from the fact of just like how wrong we were when we thought that like, you know, God's given us this intellect and we can just like sit around in our little magisterium clique and figure out how the world works by.
Oh my God, the arrogance, the hubris of these young whippersnappers astounds me. It astounds me. We are in a period of intellectual decline like I never would have imagined. When I've read philosophy, natural theology, and natural science documents from almost every, not every decade, but every century, since from the pre-Socratics up until today, I don't see this as the golden age. I don't see this as the nadir, the high point, the peak. I see that we have declined from the 13th century, from the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries. I think we've been on a slow decline, and now that decline is accelerating. That's how I see it. You know, the gadgetry, the so-called new physics. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of model building with relativity theories, with quantum stuff. And there is obviously the technology that can come out of something like the new physics with quantum stuff. I've worked in quantum physics. I have a published paper that I co-authored in quantum electronics. Okay, so I know that quantum physics is a science. There's so much speculation. There's so much bad philosophy surrounding these new sciences. The technological advancements, yes, they're impressive. Yes, they enable me to have this computer and all my devices, and communication has improved in the technological sense. But in terms of humanity, I don't think that social media is exceptionally healthy, to put it mildly. I don't think I don't even know if I would argue that we are better off because of all the technological advances, which are undeniable. But I don't know if we're better off as human beings because of this new technology. And when I say new technology, I mean technologies based on the new physics from the early 20th century. So I'm not that excited by the natural sciences, because you don't need to know natural science to go to heaven. You don't need to master natural sciences, and you don't need to advance the natural sciences. If you do so out of a love of God and love of neighbor, to advance medicine and to advance even, you know, getting resources to those in need, food, water, agriculture, these sorts of things, shelter, to build a better world, to serve the poor, to serve your neighbor, then technology is wonderful, yes. But is that how it's being used? Is that how it's being used in 2021? Are we proud of the fact that a large number, an embarrassing large number of people do not have access to clean drinking water, a healthy diet, appropriate shelter and security of person. Are we proud of that in 2021? Are you guys, Nathan and James, are you proud of that? Because you seem very proud of how far we've advanced. Are you proud? Honestly, can you look yourself in the face in the mirror and can you tell yourself that yes, it's worth it? The advancements we've made are worth at the final bottom line when you add up all the pros and cons of technology. Are you sure that that's the case, given the fact that the third world, the developing world, is struggling with things that you take for granted? I, for one, struggle with this whole question of technology and the advancement of technology. I struggle with it. I don't have a smartphone, okay? I don't wear a watch. I am not a Luddite per se, but I am not convinced that our slavery to these addictive forms of technology, I'm not convinced that our slavery to technology is a good thing. I'm not convinced.
Like, reading a bit of the Bible and looking at the stars, which are angels or something.
Yeah, like that would be more expected under theism than what we actually observe, which is the idea behind this argument. An abductive form, so rather than making inductive, we're saying the best explanation of why the laws of nature are hard to discover and very complex is that they were not the product of an intelligent designer, because an intelligent designer would plausibly have made them easier and easier to understand, and a Bayesian form.
Oh, I'm thinking of one. Did you do an analogical one as well? Like, what's it like? Like means fitted together for ends. They're like similar, like humans and minds and things are similar to like watches and stuff. That they're means fitted together for ends. And then you could say like effects don't have like causes, so they're not actually caused by the same thing or whatever.
I don't think I have an argument like that.
No watchmaker parody. So we could up it.
Yeah, look, there's and I didn't even go full on. So I realized when I was near the end of this, I realized I forgot about all the prima facie arguments. So I think I might have a couple that I put in. Yeah,
as I look at the world,
it seems on the face of it.
God, I can't see God, so it just seems he's not there. Looking around.
Yeah, so I could increase the count by adding those as well. All right, let's move on. Oh, hang on. Yes, that was basically.
But just like because they were like, well, we're doing 100 arguments, and then they upped it, and they were like, there's actually even more, and we're doing 500, but there's actually like way more. We're just
this is not all of them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can make infinite numbers of arguments for absolutely anything, true or false. You can make infinite arguments for false to arrive at a false conclusion. You can make infinite arguments to arrive at a true conclusion. So why are you talking about this?
You can keep going. The naturalistic origin of life. So obviously this is a parody on the idea that God had created life. So life originated through natural processes. Christian theism holds that God created life through supernatural processes. Therefore, Christian theism is false.
So premise one, life originated through natural processes. Says who? If that's the case, then we have... it's just a simple reduction to absurdity, guys. If there are only natural processes, then we have necessarily a circle of causation, which is absurd. Therefore, life originated not through exclusively natural processes. That's it. We have an uncaused, a supernatural uncaused first cause. Period.
So even if you think that God created life using natural processes, at some level, there's an idea that he was the instigator of it. So most Christians hold this at some level, right? And so I guess if you just deny that completely, then you could get around this argument. But a lot of Christians still make this argument. So for anyone who believes that, then they accept premise two. So then all you have to do is establish that life originated through natural processes. And that's the standard view in biochemistry and cell biology and evolutionary biology and so forth. Although we don't have all the details of that, there's quite a few ideas on the table. And the idea that a miracle was required is certainly pretty fringe. So the overwhelming consensus of experts there is that one is true, right? So I think we're on very firm ground in affirming the conclusion of this.
Firm ground? Did you hear my interview with Aaron Ra? I think it was the second interview I did of him, where I asked him to explain to me his best guess or his best understanding of how to explain the jump from non-life to life. How did that happen with natural processes? And he said, well, we've already practically done it in the laboratory, right? We've got our amino acids and lightning and ding, 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 and all this sort of thing. He did a rough overview of the alleged process by which this was almost completely carried out in the laboratory. And he talked about how they he talked about how they had to borrow a component from a living life form. I think it was a bacterium. They took a mitochondria or something, or they took one of the organelles, or they took something. He said with a straight face, he told me with a straight face that this is how we went in the laboratory from non-life to life. Step 1, find some life, borrow some pieces, put it in a put it in your flask, add some amino acids and come on, you just told me you're borrowing a component from life. Does that not qualify as cheating? I thought your project was to go from non-life to life, but you're taking components from life. So you're not starting from non-life, you're starting from life. I want you to start from non-life. And there is no natural process. There's not even a theory that will hold water that could be taken seriously, that has any leg to stand on. There's not even a hypothesis or a model. It's all fairy tales. It's all fantasy. But people want to sin. They want to indulge in their lower base animal instincts. They want that porn and masturbation and sex and group sex and everything else. And don't think I'm exaggerating, because I know multiple people that are in swingers clubs and have open relationships that are homosexuals, and they're, pansexuals and everything in between. Okay, I'm not exaggerating. These are real people in my circle. Are they still part of my circle? I don't think so, because my conversion in 2009 was a little bit too much for them. And then their conversion to the COVID cult is a little bit too much for me. So there's a great chasm to be breached there, if ever, God willing, this COVID nightmare ends.
Argument here.
Appeal to authority fallacy, non sequitur fallacy.
So many fallacies. And of course, there's an abductive argument that the best evidence indicates that life originated through natural processes. The best explanation of why we would have this evidence is that life did in fact originate through natural processes. And then so we have reason to think that Christian theism is false there. So this is saying, look, maybe it was a miracle, but look, as far as we can tell, all the evidence points to it being natural. So we wouldn't really expect that under theism.
All of the evidence is contingent matter-energy configurations in space-time. All of the evidence is contingent matter-energy configurations in space-time. All of it. All of the evidence. This little part over here, that little part over there, the whole thing taken together is contingent configurations of matter, energy, and space-time. That's what evidence is. Therefore, God.
All right, now this is a famous argument of Richard Dawkins here, the ultimate 747 gambit. Complex, and this is of my formulation, so you could maybe reformulate slightly different ways. Complex natural processes require explanation. Theism explains complex natural processes by even more complex supernatural processes. Appealing to even more complex supernatural processes does not yield a satisfactory explanation. Therefore, theism is not part of a satisfactory explanation of complex natural processes. And I couldn't really, it doesn't really follow that theism is false here. I guess you could maybe reformulate it so that it does, but it's a bit hard to gather exactly what Dawkins was saying there, so I didn't want to make these arguments stronger than it was supposed to be.
Dawkins is a moron, and you two are morons, because the natural processes themselves prove beyond a doubt, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond any doubt, we have 100% certainty by the light of natural reason, without recourse to any faith, without any assumptions, without any religion. Okay? We have 100% certain knowledge that the uncaused first cause, aka God, created the complex, yes, it is complex, the complex natural processes that we see in this beautiful world. Period. End of conversation.
But at the very least, this argument is supposed to say that theism is unnecessary or it's a bad explanation.
But it's a divinely simple complex supernatural process, you see.
Yeah, well, that's one of the counters, right? And then you've got to look at divine simplicity.
Divine simplicity is beside the point. You come to divine simplicity after you've acknowledged that a circle of causality is absurd, therefore there is an uncaused first cause, one and only uncaused first cause. And then when we examine the uncaused first cause, we are able to know many of the attributes, including the divine simplicity, the pure perfections, etc.
But this is, I guess, the reason why I'm saying like counters like that is it's just like basically inventing words and just saying and saying that they are like more explanatorily virtuous. So it's like, you know, we just have like divine parsimony on our side. We have divine fit to data. Like
I don't care what word you use. Uncaused first cause. The one and only natural being. God, Allah, Dieu, Dios, the supreme being, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. It doesn't matter what the label is. It does not matter what the label is. Yahweh, Jehovah, the big guy in the clouds. Okay? The Bible, the Old Testament, describes God as a big man walking on the clouds. You can call him the spaghetti monster. You can call him the pink fairy, whatever these atheists like to mock and ridicule monotheism with. You can call it, I'm perfectly happy. Call him, what's his name? Who's the god? Who's the god? Who's the big god in Greco-Roman pantheons? Jove? Yeah, Jove. Right? I think Jove is the big god in the Greco-Roman world. Jove, by Jove. You can call him Jove. Doesn't bother me. As long as we agree that Jove is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. He's the only one and only necessary being. He is the uncaused first cause, etc., etc. I don't care what you call him. You can call him Fred. I call him Daddy, Papa.
Yeah,
I mean that's a bit, yeah. That's obviously me parodying what I think's going on, but it's like to say that it's not much of a response. It's just like, well, I'll just invent a new like speculative thing about my God that actually, even though like you're right in what you're saying, that there's like all the, you know, like there's all these individual supernatural moving parts, one for basically each counterpart natural phenomena that's apparently being explained here. Well, I can just say, well, it's all like one thing because it's like God and that's divine and like it's a mystery, and so it's really simple in a way that only God can be. Like, it's like.
Yeah, so I think one of the aspects here that's important is that everything that God does is, well, at least on many standard forms, everything that God does is supposed to be a free choice, right? So you could...
No. God does not love himself freely. He loves himself of necessity. Anything internal to the Trinity is done of necessity. Okay? It's only ad extra that God is said to have free will.
Each free choice is an additional postulate of the theory or a new element of the theory, because otherwise it's not free, like it's determined by prior factors. So that's libertarian choice at least. So if you're saying, well, God exists, but then he did this and 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 this, those are all new things you've got to postulate about God. So the theory becomes just as complex as the thing that you're trying to explain. That's not exactly what the Boeing 747 gambit says, but I think you could reformulate it in those terms. That God is exactly as complicated as what he is supposed to explain, plus any additional complexity that he has merely by existing.
The complexity that you're attributing to God, you're doing a category error here, because you're attributing to God that, for example, Jesus Christ, who is God and man, has 10 fingers. Wow. Oh, so how can it be simple? He has 10 fingers. Well, because God is absolutely simple, but he took on a human nature. And guess what? God designed the human nature to have 10 fingers. Are there people born with fewer fingers? Yes. Are there people born with more fingers? Yes. That's called a defect, right? It's a bug, not a feature. Okay? God designed the human nature, and the human nature is good. God took on that human nature in the incarnation. God is not a human being. God is God. But the God-man Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man. This is what you fail to understand. So the complexity that you want to attribute to God is not attributable to God. It's attributable to God's nature. And when I say God's nature, I mean the human nature that he took upon himself in the incarnation. But I also mean, in another sense of the word, the nature that God created generally, meaning that he made trees with a whole bunch of leaves and a whole bunch of parts. It doesn't mean that God's composed of parts.
So yeah, I agree with the sentiment of this argument, even if the way that Dawkins phrased it is maybe not the best here, but this is just an inductive form of that, which I think is interesting in terms of explanation. All successful explanations of natural processes reduce them to simpler natural processes, and I think that this is just true here. And theism explains complex natural processes by even more complex supernatural processes, so it's not a good explanation, essentially. We've got strong reason to reject this as an explanation, because it doesn't do what all other good explanations do. There's no example of a, actually I think I might have made this up, but there's no example of any phenomena that's been generally accepted to be explained by a supernatural process.
Right.
All right, the cosmic waste of creation. So this is one you sometimes hear discussed sometimes. Most of the universe serves no purpose. God would not create a universe, the majority of which serves no purpose. Therefore, God did not create the universe. Very simple, elegant argument there.
Who says that most of the universe serves no purpose? Who says? Says who? Who are you? Where were you when I created the universe, says God? Where were you? Where were you? James, where were you, Nathan? When God created the universe, where were you? Are you in a position to judge the mind of God? Are you in a position to judge the ways of God, to say that his creation is imperfect, that his creation is too big, that his creation serves no purpose, most of it? Are you even in a position to say that any part of God's creation has a purpose, that any part of his creation has value, that any part of his creation has meaning? Are you in a position as an atheist to dare to say that? No, you're not. You're not in a position to say that. You're in a position to say it is what it is. Because if you want to say that one configuration of matter, energy, and space-time is better than any other, then welcome to monotheism, period.
Well, so here's the theist response. All that space, it's for us to explore. It's for people to...
Well, a lot of it's literally just empty space. Like, there's not a lot to explore there. It's just like space between stars and galaxies. Like, kind of empty.
accelerating away.
I mean, and you can just deny too by saying, well, if he felt like it, he could make a universe, the majority of which serves no purpose. But it's a bit strange, right? If you say, look, God created the universe for this purpose, or like, let's say put the universe aside. Say God created this house for a particular purpose. You go in the house, and like one tiny room is dedicated to that purpose, and all the other rooms are just empty. You're like, well, it doesn't seem like he created it for that purpose, did he?
Yes, yeah.
It seems like it had little to do with that. So it's unexpected, I think. And that,
I think the analogy I would make here is of a couple of retarded children, severely mentally retarded children, talking in their barbaric terms about daddy and what daddy's tools are, what purpose they might serve. What's daddy's computer? What's daddy's cell phone? What's daddy's hammer? What's daddy's car? What's daddy's tie? What are daddy's shoes? Okay? These severely mentally retarded children are not in a position to pass judgment on daddy's items, daddy's property, daddy's tools, daddy's objects. They're just not able to grasp it. They're just not able to understand that this little tablet is a communication device. It connects to the internet. He can do his accounting on it. He can do video chatting on it. They're just not in a position to understand that. When it's shut off and they stumble upon it, they just think it's a weird, random thing that serves no purpose. Okay? I don't know if you've seen the video of some gentleman, older gentleman, who receives a present for Christmas. It's a big iPad and present from his daughter. And he thanks her, and then the next scene is she's horrified when she walks in to see him preparing dinner, and he's chopping his vegetables on the iPad because he just thought it was a cutting board. So this is the level of intelligence that I see in this video, 500 Arguments Against Christianity. This is the level of intelligence. They're using an iPad for a chopping board, and they think they're oh so sophisticated. They think they're oh so clever. Check out my knife skills. Check out how thinly I'm slicing this garlic and onions. Okay? Completely naive, ignorant, unaware, no idea what the hell you're dealing with. No idea. It's embarrassing.
is, of course, well, there's a modal form, possibly necessary, would not create a God which serves no purpose, but then there's the abductive form. Most of the universe appears to serve no purpose, so we've weakened that slightly. The best explanation of why most of the universe appears to serve no purpose is that the universe was not created by a God to serve a purpose. Therefore, we've got strong evidence the universe was not created by God to serve a purpose. I don't see how you can deny one, and I think 2 is a better explanation of that observation than that God just felt like it or something. So I think it's actually a good argument. And a Bayesian form, probability of the universe appears mostly empty and to serve no purpose, is greater under atheism than under theism. Oh, and I threw in a prima facie here because I thought this was particularly suited for a prima facie. There's a few of those, but not so many of them. So most of the universe appears to serve no purpose. If most of the universe appears to serve no purpose, we have prima facie reason to believe the universe would not credible God to serve a purpose. So prima facie just means like on the face of it. So on the face of it,
to clarify, to clarify why these are in there though as well, is because the stream that we're sort of parodying here, there were quite a few of these prima facie. And was that did he talk independently about the principle of like seemings or seemings are real or something? I remember something like that. I thought it sounded like a quote from a Disney movie or something. Like seeming is believing. Yeah, so a lot of these arguments were like, well, if it seems to be that way, then it must be that way. Like, or that is the best explanation that it is that way, or something like that. And you can just say that about like, you can argue pro and con about that because a lot of things seem to be different ways to different people. Like,
pretty much, yeah. So again, source of the goose and source of the gander.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. We're on teleological argument number 46, according to their reckoning. I've gone 56 minutes and 19 seconds into their video, and I'm at just over 2 hours in my stream. So we're going to leave it there. I'll come back another day. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless. We'll see you soon.